"Stay out of the kitchen," she said, her voice light but firm, as I wandered toward the smell of freshly baked cake. "Why? What's going on in there?" I asked, trying to peek around her. "It's a mess," she replied, blocking my view with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And I'm still working on your surprise. Just trust me, okay?" I hesitated, but nodded. "All right, but you know I don't need anything fancy, right? Just the cake I asked for." She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. It's your birthday. You deserve something special this year." There was something in her tone, a hint of irritation, maybe, that made me pause. But I let it go, deciding not to push. As I sat in the living room, eating the breakfast she prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being kept at arm's length. "Why can't I just see the cake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Because it's a surprise," she said, her smile tight. "You'll see it soon enough. Just be patient." I nodded, but the unease lingered. After lunch, she shooed me out of the house. "Go take a walk or something," she said. "I need at least an hour to finish up." "An hour? For a cake?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's not just the cake," she said, her tone clipped. "There's a small surprise, too. Just trust me, okay?" I sighed but agreed, heading out the door. When I returned, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I opened the door and suddenly, everyone we knew, and some we didn't, leaped out, blowing those obnoxious party horns. "Surprise!" they shouted, their voices echoing in the small space. I forced a smile, but inside, I was annoyed. I hadn't wanted a party. I hadn't wanted anyone here. "Wow," I said, my voice flat. "This is something." My girlfriend beamed, clearly proud of herself. "I knew you'd love it." I didn't have the heart to tell her otherwise. Then I saw the cake. It wasn't what I asked for. It was beautiful, sure, 3 tiers of lemon creme with fresh berries and flowers, but it wasn't mine. My cake was supposed to be simple, chocolate with canned frosting and rainbow sprinkles. The kind my mom always made for me. This isn't what I asked for," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. She waved a hand dismissively. "I know, but I thought you'd want something special this year. You're always so plain." The words stung, but I didn't say anything. As the party dragged on, I tried to act like I was having fun, but it was hard. Everyone brought gifts, and I forced myself to smile and thank them, but my heart wasn't in it. When it was time to cut the cake, she handed me a big slice. I took a few bites, but I couldn't finish it. "I'm too full," I lied, pushing the plate away. Her smile faltered, but she didn't say anything. Then my mom showed up, holding a single cupcake. It was exactly what I wanted. Chocolate with canned frosting and rainbow sprinkles. "I couldn't make the cake this year," she said, her voice soft, "but I wanted to give you something." I couldn't hide my smile. My girlfriend's eyes narrowed. "That's unique," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Just like your mom." A few people laughed, but I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Later, as I sat in bed eating the cupcake, she muttered under her breath, "Of course you'd rather eat something that looks like it was made by a toddler than actual quality." That was the last straw. "Are you serious right now?" I snapped, turning to face her. "What?" she said, her tone defensive. "It's true. That cupcake looks like a mess. And yet, it's exactly what I wanted," I shot back. "Unlike everything else today." We fought, and I ended up sleeping on the couch on my own birthday. The next morning, I found out she told everyone I hated the party. Her family even found out I didn't pay for her insurance. It felt like she was trying to turn everyone against me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the cake. I realized then that I didn't just lose a girlfriend. I lost the illusion of who I thought she was. And as I packed up her things, I knew I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. The cupcake, simple and sweet, sat on the counter, a quiet reminder of what love was supposed to feel like. I left for work excessively early the next morning, the breakup note tucked neatly into her lunch bag. It wasn't the bravest way to end things, but I couldn't face her, not after everything that had happened. The tension between us had been building for years, and the birthday party was just the final straw. For those wondering why she rejected my marriage proposals twice, it's a complicated issue. I didn't mention it earlier because it sounds harsh to people who don't understand what it's like to live with someone who has a disability. My mom is mentally slow, and while I love her dearly, I wouldn't want to have children like her. They wouldn't have an easy life, and that's something my girlfriend couldn't accept. She thinks I might pass on bad genes, and she didn't want to take that chance. I don't think not wanting to adopt or take that risk is a bad reason to reject someone, but it still hurt. I'd like to try to have at least one child anyway because I don't have any disabilities, and I'm hoping my child would be healthy. But her rejection made it clear that she wasn't willing to take that leap with me. As I drove to work, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because the constant tension was finally over, and sadness because I'd spent 3 years with someone who didn't fully accept me, or my mom. I'm expecting to feel awful later, but for now, I'm just trying to focus on getting through the day. I'll update again when I'm not so sad, though that usually takes me a while. Another thing I saw mentioned in the replies is that the term twin soul is controversial. I'm sorry if it came across as misogynistic. That wasn't my intention. I've just seen it used and thought it meant something similar to soulmate. I didn't realize it had such a negative connotation for some people. For now, I'm just trying to take things one step at a time. The breakup note was my way of ending things without having to face her directly, but I know I'll have to deal with the fallout eventually. She read the note and, surprisingly, wasn't mad, at least not at first. She texted me saying she wanted to talk things over, but when I got home, it was clear that her calm demeanor had evaporated. Her coworker had seen the note and apparently told her how pathetic it was to end things that way. In hindsight, I agree. It wasn't my finest moment, and I wasn't thinking clearly. The conversation quickly escalated into a blur of yelling and accusations. We've gotten into arguments before, but this was different. It turned physical, something we've never done to this extent. In the chaos, I ended up breaking my forearm. She was throwing things as I tried to walk away, and I slipped while crying. The ride to the ER was probably the worst I've felt in my life. I was still crying while the nurses tried to ask me questions. At some point, they either gave me something for the pain or I passed out. I'm not sure which. When I woke up, she apologized, but I could tell she was still a little mad. She'd gotten food for herself and didn't offer me any, which stung more than I'd like to admit. After I was discharged, we got home and immediately got into another argument. I finally snapped and told her she could leave. Her sister lives less than an hour away, so she'd be fine. Eventually, she agreed to go, but she left most of her things here. She told me I have 3 days to pack up her stuff so her parents can come get it, which is fair, I guess. Now I'm sitting here, wondering if I should pack the ring in with her things. Looking at it now is humiliating, and I don't know if I want to keep it as a reminder of everything that went wrong. Surprisingly, she's only made 2 posts about it on social media, and they're very vague, only hinting at things I've done. It's not as bad as I thought it would be. Most of my friends feel bad for me, but a few, her friends first, have blocked me or sent angry texts. Her mom left a voicemail crying, saying how disappointed they were in me. I do feel a little bad for them. After all, that's their daughter, and it must be hard for them. But I really just want to leave her stuff outside without talking to them. I haven't told my mom anything yet because I know she'll worry. Right now, I don't have an appetite. There's still leftover cake in the fridge, and looking at it just makes me tired. I think I'm going to take a break from dating for a while and work on being happy alone. Right now, all I want to do is call and apologize, but I know that's not the right move. This whole situation has been a mess, and I need time to heal, both physically and emotionally. For now, I'll focus on packing up her things and figuring out how to move forward. It's going to be a long road, but I know I'll get through it eventually. Story 2. I sat at the dining table, my hands gripping the edge of the polished wood, staring at the half-empty plate in front of me. The room was filled with the usual hum of family chatter, but all I could focus on was Sheila's voice breaking through the noise. She was crying again. Her mascara smudged as she dabbed at her eyes with a crumpled napkin. "I just want to do normal mom things," she said, her voice trembling. "Just once." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. My husband, seated beside me, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Across the table, Sheila's husband, Brandon, stared at his plate, his jaw tight. Their two boys, Cooper and Teddy, were in the living room, their laughter echoing faintly through the house. Sheila's eyes flicked to me, and for a moment, I thought she was going to say something. But she didn't. She just looked away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else, something sharper, more protective. My younger daughter, Kate, was sitting next to me, her small hands busy with a piece of bread. She was oblivious to the tension, her world still filled with princesses and tea parties. Sheila had always adored her, always talked about how much she wished she had a daughter to take shopping or to brunch. But Kate wasn't a doll. She wasn't a stand-in for Sheila's unmet desires. The first time Sheila asked if Kate could go to a mommy and me tea with her, I said no. It was Mother's Day, after all, and I wanted to spend it with my girls. Sheila had nodded, her smile tight, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. She didn't argue, but the guilt lingered, gnawing at me like a persistent ache. At the family dinner last night, it all came to a head. Sheila's breakdown was raw and unfiltered, her words spilling out in a torrent of frustration and sadness. "I just want to feel like a normal mom," she said, her voice cracking. "Just once." The room was heavy with sympathy, but I couldn't shake the unease settling in my stomach. Sheila's longing wasn't just about wanting a daughter. It was about wanting an escape from the challenges of raising two special needs boys, from the isolation she felt, from the life she had. And while I could empathize with her struggles, I couldn't ignore the way she looked at Kate, like she was a lifeline. When I brought it up at work, my colleagues were quick to offer their opinions. "Let her take Kate to lunch," one of them said. "It's just one afternoon. It'll make her feel better." "Yeah," another chimed in. "You'd be the jerk if you didn't do something to help her." Their words stung, but they didn't change how I felt. Kate wasn't a bandage for Sheila's wounds. She wasn't a prop to make someone else feel better. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about Sheila. It was about boundaries. About protecting my daughter from being used to fill a void that wasn't hers to fill. Sheila's resentment had always been there, simmering beneath the surface. She loved her boys, but she didn't hide her disappointment at not having a daughter. She'd made comments over the years, little jabs that stung more than she probably intended. "It must be nice," she'd say, watching Kate twirl in her princess dress. "I'll never get to do that." I'd always brushed it off, chalking it up to her frustration. But now, it felt different. Now, it felt like she was trying to rewrite her story, using my daughter as a placeholder for the life she wished she had. The night after the family dinner, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Sheila's words in my head. "I just want to do normal mom things." What did that even mean? Was taking Kate to tea really going to make her feel better? Or was it just a temporary fix, a way to pretend for a few hours that her life was different? I thought about my own girls, about the moments I cherished with them. Reading bedtime stories, baking cookies, watching them play dress up. Those were the normal mom things that mattered to me. But for Sheila, it seemed like normal was something else entirely. Something she felt she'd been denied. The next morning, I called Sheila. She answered on the second ring, her voice hesitant. "Hey," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion in her tone. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, choosing my words carefully. "About wanting to do normal mom things." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yeah, I get it," I said. "I really do. But Kate, she's not a substitute for the daughter you wish you had. She's my daughter, and I need to protect her." Sheila was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost resigned. "I know," she said. I don't know what else to do." The conversation left me feeling drained, but also resolved. Sheila's struggles were real, but they weren't mine to fix. And while I could empathize with her, I couldn't let her use my daughter as a way to cope. A few days later, I reached out to Brandon. "Sheila's having a hard time," I said. "Have you thought about getting her some help? Maybe therapy or a support group?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've tried," he said, "but she doesn't want to go. She says it won't change anything." "It might," I said gently, "but she has to want it." In the end, I didn't let Sheila take Kate to tea. And while part of me felt guilty, the bigger part knew it was the right decision. Kate wasn't a bandage for Sheila's wounds. She wasn't a placeholder for a life Sheila wished she had. Sheila's struggles were hers to navigate, just as my boundaries were mine to enforce. And while I hoped she'd find a way to cope, to find joy in the life she had, I knew it wasn't my responsibility to fix it for her. As I tucked Kate into bed that night, her small hands clutching her favorite stuffed bunny, I felt a surge of protectiveness. She was my daughter, my responsibility, and no matter how much Sheila longed for a different life, I wouldn't let her use Kate to rewrite her story. Because sometimes the hardest thing to do is to say no. But sometimes it's also the most important. That whole situation left me with this icky feeling I couldn't shake off. I've never liked my SIL, Sheila, but ever since her youngest was born, it felt like the whole family was treading carefully around her. Her behavior was only getting worse, and we didn't know how to handle it. It wasn't just the way she doted on my younger daughter, Kate, or the way she seemed to resent her own sons. It was the way she looked at me sometimes, like I had something she could never have, a life she thought was easier, more fulfilling. But after the family dinner where Sheila broke down, something shifted. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy, but it was the start of something. A reckoning, maybe, for Sheila, for her husband, Brandon, and for the rest of us who had been tiptoeing around her for far too long. It all started the Sunday after that dinner. My MIL, Carol, had been a school counselor before she retired, and she wasn't about to let this family fall apart without a fight. She called Sheila and me into the living room, her expression calm but unyielding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm. "All of us." The conversation that followed was messy, raw, and long overdue. Sheila's tears flowed freely as she admitted how isolated she felt, how overwhelmed she was by the challenges of raising two special needs boys. She talked about the IEP meetings, the meltdowns, the judgmental looks from other parents. She talked about how Brandon seemed to check out when things got hard, leaving her to shoulder the burden alone. "I just wanted to feel normal," she said, her voice breaking, like the other moms who can take their kids to brunch or go shopping without it turning into a disaster. "But I can't, and I hate it. I hate being a mom." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unflinching. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, and part of me did. But another part of me couldn't shake the memory of her trying to use Kate as a stand-in for the daughter she never had. Carol didn't let us leave that room without a plan. She chewed Brandon out for not stepping up, for leaving Sheila to handle everything on her own. "You're their father," she said, her voice sharp. "Start acting like it." Then she turned to Sheila. "You need therapy," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You can't keep carrying this by yourself. And you," she added, looking at me, "need to set boundaries. For your sake and for your girls." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And over the next few months, things began to change. Sheila started therapy. Brandon became more involved with the kids, taking them to their appointments and activities without complaint. Sheila even joined an adult ballet class, where she met other moms who understood her struggles. 2 of them were boy moms, and one had a son with autism. For the first time in years, Sheila seemed lighter, less frazzled, less resentful. But old habits die hard. At my daughter's birthdays, the cracks in Sheila's progress showed. Kate received an extravagant DIY nail spa kit, while Alana got clothes that didn't fit. The favoritism was impossible to ignore, and it left me feeling uneasy. I've been keeping my distance since then, careful not to leave the girls alone with Sheila. I want to believe she's changing, that therapy and her new friends are helping her find a healthier way to cope. But I can't ignore the way she still looks at Kate, like she's a lifeline to the life Sheila wishes she had. For now, I'm watching and waiting. Sheila's journey isn't over, and neither is mine. I'll keep protecting my girls, setting boundaries, and hoping that one day Sheila will truly see them for who they are, not as extensions of her own unmet desires, but as individuals with their own needs, wants, and identities. Because at the end of the day, that's what being a mom is all about. It's not about living through your children or using them to fill a void. It's about loving them for who they are, even when it's hard. And if Sheila can't do that, then she's not just failing them. She's failing herself. Time will tell if Sheila's changes are lasting or just another temporary fix. But for now, I'm focusing on what I can control. My girls, my boundaries, and my own peace of mind. Because no matter what happens, I won't let anyone, not even family, use my children as a band-aid for their own wounds. And if that makes me the jerk in someone else's story, so be it. My girls are worth it. I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of my laptop screen casting long shadows across the room. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional tap of my fingers on the keyboard as I scrolled through a year's worth of bank statements. My heart sank with every charge I saw. Over 100 transactions from PlayStation, totaling nearly $1,500. My stomach churned. I only had 2 PlayStation accounts, and I'd made exactly 4 purchases in the past year. Someone had my credit card information, and I had no idea how. I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. This couldn't be happening. I'd always been careful with my finances, meticulous even. I didn't splurge on unnecessary things, and I certainly didn't spend hundreds of dollars on video games. Yet here I was, staring at a list of charges that didn't belong to me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Before jumping to conclusions, I decided to reach out to my siblings. Both of their kids had PlayStation accounts, and I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was an honest mistake. Maybe one of the kids had accidentally used my card without realizing it. I called my sister first. Her voice was cheerful when she answered, but it quickly turned defensive when I explained the situation. My son wouldn't do something like that, she said firmly. He knows better. I tried to keep my tone calm, assuring her I wasn't accusing anyone, just trying to figure out what had happened. She reluctantly agreed to ask him, but I could hear the irritation in her voice. Next, I called my brother. His response was similar: denial, defensiveness, and a hint of annoyance that I'd even suggest his kids might be involved. By the time I hung up, I felt more frustrated than before. With their assurances, I moved forward. I called PlayStation and my bank, explaining the situation. The bank was able to reverse the charges from the past few months, but the rest were under investigation. I felt a small sense of relief, but it didn't last long. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a frantic call from my nephew. His voice was panicked, almost shrill. "Auntie, my PlayStation account got permanently banned," he blurted out. My stomach dropped. I asked him again, calmly, if he was sure he hadn't made any purchases with a credit card. I reminded him that I'd given him a generous PlayStation gift card for his birthday just a few months ago. He swore up and down that he hadn't used anything but the gift card. But something didn't sit right. I had access to his email account, a privilege I'd been given years ago to help him set up his account, so I logged in and checked the purchase history. There it was, transaction after transaction, all tied to his account. Games, skins, in-game currency, everything he'd been playing with for months. My heart raced as I scrolled through the list, each charge a punch to the gut. When I confronted him, his story changed. "Okay, maybe I bought a few things here and there," he admitted, his voice shaky. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. This wasn't just a few things. This was over $1,000 of my money. When I called my sister to explain what had happened, her reaction was anything but supportive. She was furious, not at her son, but at me. "You must have added your credit card to his account at some point," she snapped. "If it were my card, I'd get alerts. This is your fault." I was stunned. She didn't even consider the possibility that her son had taken my credit card information. Instead, she blamed me for not monitoring my account closely enough. "He always asks me before making purchases," she insisted. "I don't understand why you didn't get alerts. You shouldn't blame him for this." I tried to stay calm, but my frustration boiled over. "He knew he was spending someone else's money," I said. "Why is that my fault? And maybe he stopped asking you because no one stopped him." The argument escalated. She accused me of blaming her kid for everything, refusing to believe the evidence until I showed her every single transaction. Finally, faced with the undeniable proof, my nephew confessed. "I thought it was your card, Mom," he said, his voice small. "My sister agreed to pay me back for the charges, but the damage was done." The trust one had in both of them was shattered. She decided my nephew wouldn't get his PlayStation 5 back until he worked to pay off the debt, and even then, she wasn't sure she'd let him have it. He promised to pay both of us double for the trouble he'd caused, but the words felt hollow. As I sat there that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but replay the conversation with my sister. Her defensiveness, her refusal to hold her son accountable, it all felt familiar. Growing up, she had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Even now, as an adult, she couldn't see past her own biases. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to prove myself, to earn the approval of my family. But no matter what I did, it never seemed to be enough. And now, even when I was the one who had been wronged, I was the one being blamed. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their excuses. I had built my life on my own terms, and I wasn't going to let their mistakes define me. My sister paid me back, and my nephew lost his PlayStation privileges, but the real victory was in realizing that I didn't need to fight for their respect anymore. I had my own life, my own strength, and my own sense of justice. As I packed up my things and prepared to move on, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The past didn't define me. My future did. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I received a call from my brother. He'd heard about what happened with my sister and nephew, and he wanted to talk. At first, I thought he was going to apologize for how he'd reacted when I first reached out, but instead, he had a confession of his own. "I checked my kids' accounts after you called," he said, his voice hesitant. "And well, I found some charges too." I wasn't surprised. My brother's kids were younger, but they were just as tech-savvy as my nephew. Still, hearing him admit it felt like a small victory. He apologized for not believing me earlier and promised to pay me back for any charges that were linked to his kids. It was a small step, but it meant something. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my family was starting to see me, not as the forgotten sibling, but as someone who deserved to be heard. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my life. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and surrounded myself with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I didn't need my family's approval to feel whole. I had my own strength, my own resilience, and my own sense of self-worth. And as for my sister and nephew, they're still figuring things out. My nephew is working to pay off his debt, and my sister is slowly coming to terms with the fact that her golden child isn't as perfect as she thought. It's not the happy ending I imagined, but it's a start. Because in the end, the only person I needed to prove myself to was me. And I've already won that battle. I sat at my desk, staring at the email from my manager. The subject line read, "Shortlist for assistant position, feedback requested." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to type. The names of the candidates stared back at me, but one in particular made my stomach churn. Circe. We used to be friends. More than friends, we were roommates. She was the kind of person who could light up a room with her laugh. The kind of person who made you feel like you were the most important person in the world when she focused her attention on you. But that was before I walked in on her and my father. Before I realized that the entire time we lived together, she'd been using me to get closer to him. The memory still burned. The sound of their voices, the way she'd looked at me, not with guilt, but with something like pity. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she'd said, as if she were the one who'd been wronged. I'd packed my things and left that same night, cutting her out of my life completely. My father, of course, was just as guilty, but my mom had decided to stay with him, and I'd been left to pick up the pieces of my shattered trust. Now, here she was, on the shortlist for a position at the nonprofit I loved. A position that would require us to work closely together. My manager had asked for input, and I knew I had to say something. But how? How could I explain that Circe wasn't just a former friend? She was a walking reminder of the worst betrayal of my life. I closed the email and leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. The nonprofit was my safe space. It was where I felt like I was making a difference, where I could pour my energy into helping low-income students achieve their dreams. I loved my job, my boss, my coworkers. The thought of Circe infiltrating that space made me feel sick. But what could I say? "Hey, Just so you know, Cersei had an affair with my dad, so I'd rather not work with her? It sounded petty, even to me. And yet, the idea of sitting across from her in meetings, of exchanging polite small talk in the break room, made my skin crawl. I glanced at the clock. My manager had asked for feedback by the end of the day, and I was running out of time. I opened the email again and stared at Cersei's name. She was qualified for the position. I couldn't deny that. She was organized, detail-oriented, and had a knack for making people feel at ease. But none of that mattered to me. Not after what she'd done. I took a deep breath and started typing. Hi, manager's name. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to provide input on the candidates. I wanted to let you know that I have a personal history with one of the candidates, Cersei. We were roommates for a brief period, and during that time, she engaged in behavior that I found deeply unethical and hurtful. While I believe she may be a good fit for the role in terms of skills and experience, I don't feel comfortable working closely with her due to this history. I paused, rereading the words. They felt inadequate, but what else could I say? I couldn't exactly go into the details of what had happened. That was a conversation I never wanted to have with anyone, let alone my manager. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came faster than I expected. Thanks for letting me know. I appreciate your honesty. I'll take this into consideration as we make our decision. It was a neutral response, but it didn't make me feel any better. What if they hired her anyway? What if my manager thought I was being unreasonable? I couldn't quit this job. I loved it too much. But I also couldn't imagine working alongside Cersei, pretending like nothing had happened. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I tried to focus on my work, but every time my phone buzzed with an email notification, my heart skipped a beat. Finally, the decision came. Hi, team. After careful consideration, we've decided to offer the assistant position to Cersei. She brings a unique set of skills and experiences that we believe will be a great asset to our team. Please join me in welcoming her when she starts next week. I stared at the email, my chest tightening. They'd hired her. Despite my input, despite everything, they'd hired her. I spent the weekend trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't quit. This job was too important to me. But I also couldn't pretend like everything was fine. In the end, I decided I would have to set boundaries. I would be polite, professional, and nothing more. I wouldn't let her get to me. When Cersei walked into the office on her first day, she looked the same as she always had, confident, put together, and completely at ease. She smiled when she saw me, but I didn't smile back. Hey, she said, her voice soft. It's good to see you. I nodded, my jaw tight. Welcome to the team. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, but I turned away before she could. The weeks that followed were tense. We worked together when we had to, but I kept our interactions brief and to the point. She tried to talk to me a few times, to apologize, but I shut her down every time. Mandy, can we please talk? She asked one day, cornering me in the break room. There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice cold. We're coworkers. That's it. She looked hurt, but I didn't care. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. Eventually, she stopped trying. We settled into an uneasy truce, working together when necessary, but otherwise avoiding each other. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. And then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was in a meeting with my manager, going over some data, when she brought up Cersei. I know things have been tense between you two, she said carefully. But I wanted to let you know that I've noticed how professional you've been. It can't be easy, and I really appreciate it. I nodded, unsure of what to say. If it ever becomes too much, she continued, please don't hesitate to let me know. Your well-being is important to us. Her words caught me off guard. I hadn't realized she'd been paying attention. After that, things felt a little easier. I still didn't trust Cersei, and I doubted I ever would. But I realized that I didn't have to let her define my experience at work. This job was mine, and I wasn't going to let her take it away from me. I threw myself into my work, focusing on the students we were helping and the impact we were making. And slowly, the anger I'd been carrying started to fade. Cersei was still there, a constant reminder of what had happened, but she didn't have power over me anymore. I'd built something for myself, something she couldn't touch. And that was enough. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, Cersei approached me. "Mandy," she said, her voice quiet. "I know I don't deserve it, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She looked tired, her usual confidence replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said finally, "but I appreciate the apology." She nodded, her eyes filled with something that might have been regret. "I understand," she said. I hope one day you can." I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up my bag and walked out of the office, leaving her behind. Because this was my story, not hers. And I wasn't going to let her write the ending. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Cersei and I continued to coexist in the same space, but the tension between us never fully dissipated. There were moments when I caught her glancing at me, as if she wanted to say something, but I always looked away before she could. I focused on my work, on the students we were helping, and on the small victories that came with it. There was a particular student, a young girl named Maria, who had been struggling with her grades. I spent extra time with her, helping her with her studies and encouraging her to believe in herself. Seeing her progress was a reminder of why I loved this job so much. One afternoon, as I was helping Maria with a particularly difficult math problem, Cersei walked into the room. She hesitated for a moment before approaching us. "Hi, Maria," she said, her voice warm. "How's it going?" Maria looked up and smiled. "Good. Mandy's helping me with this problem. It's really hard, but I think I'm getting it." Cersei nodded, her eyes flickering to me for a brief moment before returning to Maria. "That's great. If you ever need any more help, just let me know, okay?" Maria nodded enthusiastically, and Cersei gave her a small smile before walking away. I watched her go, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. It was the first time I'd seen her interact with one of the students, and it was clear that she cared about them. For a moment, I wondered if I had misjudged her. But then I remembered the betrayal, the pain she had caused, and the moment passed. As the months went by, I began to notice small changes in Cersei. She seemed less confident, more reserved. There were times when she looked almost sad. I didn't know what had caused the change, and I didn't ask. But it was hard to ignore. One day, as I was leaving the office, I saw her sitting alone in the break room, staring at her phone. She looked up as I passed, and for a moment, our eyes met. "Mandy," she said softly, "can we talk? Just for a minute?" I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to keep walking, to leave her behind as I had done so many times before. But another part of me was curious. What could she possibly have to say? I nodded and sat down across from her, keeping my expression neutral. "I know I've said this before," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "but I really am sorry. For everything. I know I hurt you, and I know I can't take that back. But I want you to know that I regret it. Every single day." I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of insincerity, but all I saw was genuine remorse. "Why now?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Why are you telling me this now?" She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Because I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About the choices I've made, the people I've hurt. And I realize that I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending like everything's okay when it's not." I didn't respond, unsure of what to say. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she continued. "I know I don't deserve it, but I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, to do better." I nodded slowly, processing her words. "I appreciate that," I said finally, "but it's going to take more than words to make up for what you did." She nodded, her eyes filled with something that looked like hope. "I know, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes." The conversation with Cersei stayed with me for days. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the sincerity in her voice and the regret in her eyes. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her a second chance. But another part of me was still too hurt, too angry to let go of the past. I decided to give it time, to see if her actions matched her words. And over the next few weeks, I began to notice small changes. She was more considerate, more thoughtful. She went out of her way to help others, to make amends for her past mistakes. It wasn't enough to erase the pain she had caused, but it was a start. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I saw Cersei sitting on a bench outside, staring at the sunset. I hesitated for a moment before walking over and sitting down beside her. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly, not looking at me. I nodded, following her gaze. The sky was a brilliant mix of oranges and pinks, the sun slowly sinking below the horizon. "I used to take sunsets for granted," she continued, "but now I see them differently. They remind me that no matter how bad things get, there's always a chance for a new beginning." I turned to look at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "I'm not the same person I was back then," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "I know I can't change the past, but I'm trying to be better, to be the kind of person who deserves a second chance." I didn't respond right away, letting her words sink in. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said finally, "but I can see that you're trying, and that means something." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, Mandy. That's all I can ask for." We sat there in silence for a while, watching as the sun disappeared below the horizon. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a start, because this was my story, and I was finally ready to take control of it. Story 5. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the half-packed suitcase in front of me. The room felt smaller than ever, cluttered with the remnants of a life I was about to leave behind. My laptop sat on the desk in the corner, my makeshift office since his mother had moved in 6 months ago. 6 months of constant interruptions, passive-aggressive comments, and a fiancé who seemed more concerned with his mother's comfort than mine. I could hear her in the kitchen now, humming some tune as she rearranged my cabinets for the 3rd time this week. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. I was done. Beside me, my phone buzzed with a text from my friend. Asterisk, "You still good to move in next month?" Asterisk, I didn't hesitate. Asterisk, yes. Counting the days. Asterisk, I hit send and took a deep breath, the weight of my decision settling over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just about the apartment, or the rent, or even his mother. It was about the fact that I had spent the last year and a half bending over backward to make this relationship work, and all I had to show for it was a fiancé who couldn't, or wouldn't, stand up for me. The kitchen was a battlefield, though you wouldn't know it by looking at her. She stood at the counter, slicing vegetables with the precision of someone who had all the time in the world. Her hair was perfectly styled, her apron spotless, and her smile just a little too sweet. "Oh, Mandy," she said, not even looking up as I walked in. "I was just thinking, maybe you could take me to the store later. You know how I hate driving in this city." I bit back the retort that was on the tip of my tongue. "No, I don't know, because you've never even tried." Instead, I forced a smile. "Sorry, I've got work. Maybe your son can take you." She sighed, the kind of sigh that made it clear I was the unreasonable one. "He's so busy with his job, though. You're home all day. Surely you can spare an hour." I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed my coffee and retreated to the bedroom, where my fiancé, asterisk ex-fiancé, asterisk, was still asleep. He'd stayed up late playing video games again, something he'd been doing more and more since his mom moved in. I shook him awake. "We need to talk." He blinked at me, groggy and confused. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" I repeated, my voice low but sharp. "Your mom. This apartment. Us. Everything's wrong, and you know it." He sat up, running a hand through his messy hair. "I know it's not ideal, but she's my mom. I can't just kick her out." "I'm not asking you to kick her out," I said, though part of me was. "I'm asking you to see that this isn't working. I'm paying half the rent for a place where I don't even have my own space. I'm working full-time while she treats me like her personal chauffeur and maid. And you just let it happen." He looked away, guilt flashing across his face. "I'll talk to her," he said, but it was the same empty promise he'd been making for months. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done waiting for you to fix this. I'm moving out." His head snapped up, eyes wide. "What? Where are you going?" "My friend's losing her roommate. I'm moving in with her at the end of the month." "But what about us? What about the apartment?" "You and your mom can figure it out," I said, crossing my arms. I'm not funding her lifestyle anymore. From now on, I'm only paying 25% of the rent. And after I move, I'm not paying anything. He stared at me, stunned. You can't just leave us like this. Watch me. The next few days were a blur of packing and planning. I moved my important documents and valuables to my friend's place, just in case. I told my fiancé, ex-fiancé, that he needed to tell his mom, but he kept putting it off, hoping, I think, that I'd change my mind. I didn't. When I started moving boxes to the living room, she finally noticed. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. "I'm moving out," I said, not bothering to sugarcoat it. Her face fell, but only for a moment. Then she straightened, her expression hardening. "Well, I suppose that's for the best. You were never really cut out for this kind of life anyway." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You're right. I'm not cut out for being a doormat." The day I moved out, I felt lighter than I had in months. My friend helped me load the last of my things into her car, and as we drove away, I didn't look back. The apartment, the fiancé, the mother-in-law from hell, they were all someone else's problem now. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like it was mine to shape, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were a mix of relief and reflection. My new living situation was a breath of fresh air. My friend and I had a rhythm, a mutual respect for each other's space and time. There were no interruptions during work hours, no passive-aggressive comments about how I spent my time or money. It was peaceful, and I realized just how much I had been missing that peace. Meanwhile, my ex-fiancé's life seemed to be unraveling. He called me a few times, his voice tinged with panic. "Mandy, I can't do this on my own. My mom's driving me crazy, and the rent, it's too much." I listened, but I didn't offer solutions. "You'll figure it out," I said simply. His mother, true to form, tried to reach out to me. She sent a few texts, each one more guilt-tripping than the last. "I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything. How could you do this to my son? He loves you. You're selfish, Mandy. Just like I always said." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her words no longer had power over me. As the months passed, I focused on myself. I threw myself into my work, took up new hobbies, and reconnected with friends I had neglected during my relationship. I even started dating again, though cautiously. I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, but it was nice to feel wanted, to feel like I mattered. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my ex-fiancé. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I should have stood up for you. I should have put you first." I read the message twice before setting my phone down. I didn't reply. Some apologies, no matter how sincere, come too late. The final chapter of this saga came when I heard through the grapevine that my ex-fiancé and his mother had moved back to the Midwest. Apparently, the cost of living in the city had been too much for them to handle without my financial support. I felt a twinge of sadness for him, but it was fleeting. He had made his choices, and I had made mine. As for me, I was thriving. I had a new apartment, a new outlook on life, and a newfound sense of self-worth. The girl who had once bent over backward to please everyone else was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her value and wasn't afraid to demand the respect she deserved. Looking back, I realized that leaving wasn't just about escaping a bad situation. It was about reclaiming my life, my happiness, and my future. I had spent so long trying to prove myself to people who would never see my worth. Now, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I had my own, and that was more than enough. Story 6. I sat in the living room, the investigator's report spread out on the coffee table in front of me. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each one revealing a new layer of betrayal. My husband, the man I had loved for over a decade, the father of my children, had been living a double life. The man I thought I knew was a stranger, and the life we had built together felt like a house of cards, collapsing under the weight of his lies. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of disbelief, of a reality I could no longer ignore. Beside me, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother, asking how I was holding up. I didn't reply. How could I? How could I explain that the man I had trusted with my heart, my life, my children, had been financing another woman's lifestyle, attending sex parties, and posting explicit details of his escapades online? The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating. I thought back to the condom I had found in his blazer pocket 2 weeks ago. At the time, I had tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was old. Maybe he had forgotten it was there. But deep down, I knew. That small, innocuous object had been the first crack in the foundation of our marriage, and now, the entire structure was crumbling around me. I had always known he was secretive. The constant phone use, the vague errands, the sudden work trips, they had all been red flags I had chosen to ignore. I told myself I was being paranoid, that his demanding job required his attention, that I was lucky to have a husband who provided so much for our family. But now, the truth was staring me in the face, and there was no denying it. The investigator's report was meticulous. It detailed his affair with a woman 15 years his junior, the money he had poured into her failing business, the sex parties they attended together, and his revolting online presence. He had been posting in forums for years, bragging about his addiction to porn and escorts, sharing explicit photos, and detailing his exploits with other women. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, was a stranger. I felt sick. My stomach churned as I read through the report, each new revelation more horrifying than the last. How could he do this to me? To our children? How could he risk everything we had built for a cheap thrill? 00:01:47 ***. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to scream and cry and demand answers. But another part of me knew I needed to be smart. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about our children, our future, and protecting what little was left of the life we had built. I reached out to a solicitor, a friend of a friend who specialized in divorce cases. She was kind but firm, walking me through the process and advising me on how to protect myself and the children. She warned me that infidelity wouldn't necessarily impact the division of assets, but she was confident we could secure a fair settlement. In the meantime, I scheduled an STI test. The thought of it made my skin crawl, but I knew I had to be sure. The results came back negative, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief. At least he hadn't taken that from me too. I waited until after the holidays to confront him. I didn't want to ruin Christmas for the kids, to take away one last happy memory before everything changed. But as soon as the new year passed, I got to work. I packed his belongings into 6 suitcases, changed the locks, and prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. When he returned from his latest work trip, I was ready. The suitcases were lined up in the hallway, the divorce papers waiting on the table. I handed him the report, watching as his face paled with each page he turned. "It was a compulsion," he stammered, tears streaming down his face. I was stressed. I didn't know how to stop. "If you leave me, I'll have no choice but to marry her. But if you take me back, I'll end it immediately." His words were like a knife to the heart. Not because they hurt, but because they revealed just how little he understood the gravity of what he had done. He thought he could manipulate me, that I would forgive him because he was stressed. But I wasn't the same woman he had married. I was stronger now, and I wasn't going to let him destroy me. After hours of back and forth, he finally gave up. He sat at the bottom of the stairs, surrounded by his suitcases, waiting for a cab to take him away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt empty. The legal battle ahead would be long and grueling, but I was ready. My solicitor was confident we could secure the house and enough assets for me to live independently. As for the children, I had already spoken to a child psychologist to figure out the best way to explain the situation to them. They were too young to understand the full picture, but they deserved to know the truth. As I stood in the hallway, watching him leave, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. For the first time in years, I was free. Free from the lies, the secrets, the constant fear that I wasn't enough. I didn't need him to define me anymore. I walked back into the house, closing the door behind me. The silence was deafening, But for the first time in a long time, it felt peaceful. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to be okay. Because I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a survivor. And no matter what happened next, I was going to thrive. The days that followed were a blur. I threw myself into the legal process, determined to secure the best possible outcome for myself and the children. My solicitor was a godsend, guiding me through every step with patience and expertise. We filed for divorce, citing his infidelity and reckless behavior as grounds for the separation. Meanwhile, I focused on the kids. They were confused, of course, and heartbroken. How could they not be? Their father had been a constant presence in their lives, and now he was gone. I did my best to explain the situation in a way they could understand, emphasizing that none of this was their fault and that both their father and I still loved them very much. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the right decision. Was I being too harsh? Should I have given him another chance? But then I would remember the report, the photos, the explicit posts, and the anger would come rushing back. No, I had done the right thing. For myself and for my children. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild my life. I started seeing a therapist who helped me process the betrayal and work through the anger and pain. I reconnected with old friends, some of whom I had lost touch with over the years. And I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine and the sense of accomplishment it brought. But the hardest part was learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. For so long, I had doubted my instincts, convinced myself that I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid. But now I knew better. I had trusted my gut, and it had led me to the truth. As for him, he tried to reach out a few times. He sent flowers, wrote long, rambling emails begging for forgiveness, and even showed up at the house uninvited, pleading for a second chance. But I stood my ground. I had given him enough chances, and he had blown every single one. Eventually, he stopped trying. He moved in with the other woman, the one he had been financing all along. I didn't care. Let her have him. She could deal with his lies, his secrets, his compulsions. I was done. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I got the house, a fair share of the assets, and full custody of the children. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I felt like giving up, but I kept going. For myself and for my kids. And now, as I sit here in the living room of the house that is finally, truly mine, I feel a sense of peace I haven't felt in years. The past is behind me, and the future is mine to shape. I don't know what it holds, but I know one thing for certain. I am stronger than I ever thought possible, because I am not just a betrayed wife. I am a survivor, and no matter what happens next, I will thrive. The months after the divorce were a time of healing and rediscovery. I focused on creating a new normal for the kids and myself. We established routines that brought stability and comfort, and I made a conscious effort to fill our home with laughter and love. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of everything felt overwhelming, but we got through it together. I also began to rediscover myself. For so long, I had defined myself in relation to him, his wife, his partner, his support system. Now, I was learning who I was outside of that role. I took up hobbies I had abandoned years ago, like painting and gardening, and found joy in the simple act of creating something beautiful. I also started dating again, though tentatively at first. It was strange, putting myself out there after so many years, but it was also liberating. I met a few kind, interesting men, but I wasn't in a rush to find love again. I was content to take things slow, to focus on building a life that made me happy, with or without a partner. And then, one day, I met someone who made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. He was kind, patient, and understanding, and he respected the boundaries I had set for myself. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but it was real, and it was built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. As for my ex, I heard through the grapevine that his relationship with the other woman had fallen apart. Apparently, she had grown tired of his lies and manipulations, just as I had. He tried to reach out to me again, but I didn't respond. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let him drag me back into the past. The kids, too, were doing better. They still missed their father, but they had adjusted to our new reality. We talked openly about their feelings, and I made sure they knew that it was okay to be angry, sad, or confused. Most importantly, I made sure they knew they were loved. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. The woman who sat in that living room, trembling with rage and disbelief, is not the woman I am today. I am stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. And while the scars of betrayal will always be a part of me, they no longer define me. I have built a life that is mine, filled with love, laughter, and the knowledge that I am enough. Because I am not just a betrayed wife. I am a survivor. And no matter what happens next, I will thrive.